My name is Evelyn Carter, and I'm 38 years old. If you had asked me late last year how my life was going, I would have smiled politely and said, "We're just going through a rough patch." That's what I told my coworkers during lunch breaks. That's what I told my sister on Sunday night calls. That's what I told myself when I lay awake at 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling and listening to the hum of traffic outside our apartment in Austin, Texas. A rough patch. Something temporary, something mature adults work through with calm conversations, patience, and maybe a long weekend away to reset. What I didn't realize was that what I called a rough patch was actually the moment the road had already disappeared, and I was still pressing the gas, pretending we weren't in freefall. I had been with my fiancé, Daniel, for almost 6 years. We met in our early 30s, built a life that looked stable from the outside, and convinced everyone, including ourselves, that we were doing everything right. We lived together. We talked about buying a house. We talked about timelines. We talked about the future like it was a checklist we just hadn't finished yet. But somewhere along the way he looked at me changed. I worked in corporate finance at a logistics firm. It wasn't glamorous, no flashy titles, no LinkedIn posts that went viral, but it was steady, respected work. I was good at it. I liked being good at it. Daniel, on the other hand, loved momentum. He loved words like growth, scale, next level. He measured life in milestones and speed. And slowly, quietly, I started to feel like I was being evaluated instead of loved. Before I go any further, let me ask you something, and I mean this sincerely. If you've ever been in a relationship where someone you loved questioned your ambition while you were still figuring things out, if you've ever been judged during your hardest season instead of supported, I want you to pause and drop a comment. Share your experience. You're not alone here. And if stories like this resonate with you, stories about betrayal, growth, and quiet justice, consider subscribing. There's more to this, and what happened next changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and worth. At the time, though, I didn't see it that way. I kept telling myself we were just tired, just stressed, just out of sync. I believed that if I stayed calm, stayed patient, stayed reasonable, things would correct themselves. I didn't yet understand that sometimes when someone decides who you are without listening to you, the ending has already been written. When Daniel and I first got engaged, everyone said the same thing. "You two are so solid. You're such a stable couple. You just make sense." And on paper, we did. We were both in our 30s. No messy drama, no impulsive chaos. We paid our bills on time. We planned vacations months ahead. We talked about interest rates and school districts instead of clubs and hangovers. From the outside, it looked like maturity, like progress. What people didn't see was how much of myself I was quietly folding inward to make that picture stay intact. Daniel worked in real estate consulting. His income fluctuated. Some months were incredible, others stressful. I was the steady one, the predictable one, the safety net. When deals fell through, I reminded him it was temporary. When he doubted himself, I reminded him of his potential. I believed in him loudly, publicly, and without hesitation. I just didn't realize that same generosity wasn't being returned. At first, the comments were subtle enough to ignore. "You're comfortable," he'd say casually, usually over dinner. "Comfortable isn't bad," I'd reply, smiling. "It means stable." He'd nod, but something in his eyes always lingered. Dissatisfaction, maybe impatience. Then the questions started. "Don't you ever want more? Is this really where you see yourself in 5 years? Why aren't you pushing harder?" I tried to answer honestly. I told him I liked my work, that I valued consistency, that I was planning my next move carefully instead of rushing it. I explained that ambition didn't always look loud, but every explanation felt like a defense, and every defense felt like I was already losing. I started editing myself without realizing it.
downplaying my exhaustion, minimizing my stress, avoiding conversations that might turn into evaluations. I still supported him fully. When he talked about future investments, I listened. When he wanted reassurance, I gave it. When he worried about being behind, I reminded him that life wasn't a race. What I didn't notice at first was that I was the only one extending grace. By the time winter came, the warmth between us felt thinner. Not gone, just fragile, like ice you're not sure can hold your weight anymore. We still shared a bed, but the space between us grew wider. Conversations stayed surface level. Laughter became something we had to work toward instead of something that happened naturally. There were nights I lay awake beside him, wondering when love had started to feel like a performance review. I remember one particular evening, standing in the kitchen while he scrolled through his phone. "So-and-so just bought a house," he said, not looking up. "Good for them," I replied automatically. He glanced at me then, measuring. We should be doing things like that. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. We will, when it makes sense. That's always your answer, when it makes sense. I didn't argue, I didn't raise my voice, I just nodded and went back to rinsing dishes, blinking away the sting I refused to name. Because naming it would have meant admitting something I wasn't ready to face yet. That maybe, in the moments I needed understanding the most, I was slowly becoming someone he was disappointed in. And loving someone who sees you that way does something quiet but devastating to your spirit. It doesn't break you all at once. It wears you down, gently, persistently, until you start questioning parts of yourself you once trusted completely.
There's a moment in every relationship where disappointment stops being quiet. For us, it didn't arrive with screaming or slammed doors. It arrived through comparisons. Daniel started talking about other people more often. Not directly, not cruelly, just enough to leave a bruise. "My friend Marcus just closed on another property," he said one night while we were eating takeout on the couch. "He's younger than us. Makes you think." Think about what? I wanted to ask, but I already knew. At a dinner with friends, someone mentioned a promotion and Daniel laughed a little too loudly. "See," he said later in the car, "that's what hunger looks like." Hunger. The words stuck to me like an accusation. I wasn't lazy. I wasn't drifting. I wasn't avoiding responsibility. I was planning. I was building quietly. I was choosing sustainability over spectacle. But the way Daniel framed it, none of that counted unless it looked impressive to someone else. The real shift happened when he stopped asking questions. He didn't ask what I was thinking about next. He didn't ask what I was preparing for. He assumed he already knew. "You're playing it safe," he said one evening, leaning against the kitchen counter. "I'm being strategic," I replied, trying to stay calm. He shook his head. "That's what people say when they're afraid to risk failing." Something inside me snapped, not loudly, but permanently. "You think I'm afraid?" I asked. "I think you're comfortable," he said, "and comfort kills momentum." I stared at him, stunned. This was the man I had supported through uncertainty, reassured during slow months, believed in without conditions. And now he was reducing me to a narrative that made his impatience easier to justify. I tried one last time to explain myself. "I've been positioning for something bigger," I said carefully. "I just don't talk about it until it's real." He crossed his arms. "That's convenient." Convenient. As if my silence was dishonesty, as if privacy meant deception. That's when I realized something terrifying. He wasn't listening to understand me. He was listening to confirm what he already believed. From that point on, every conversation felt tilted. If I expressed caution, it was weakness. If I expressed confidence, it was denial. There was no version of me that fit the story he had decided to tell himself. And the angrier I became, the quieter I got. Because anger doesn't always come out as rage. Sometimes it hardens into resolve. The night everything finally cracked, we were sitting at the table, bills spread out between us. "We need to think bigger," Daniel said. "I don't want to look back and realize we wasted time." I looked at him, really looked, and felt something cold and clarifying. "You keep talking about we, but this sounds like what you want." He scoffed.
I want a partner who moves forward. So do I replied. I just don't measure forward the same way you do. That's the problem. Your way doesn't go anywhere fast enough. That was it. Not because it was cruel, but because it was definitive. In that moment, I understood that in his eyes, my worth was conditional, based on speed, based on optics, based on outcomes he could brag about. And suddenly, all the small comments from the past year lined up into something unmistakable. He didn't see me as a partner in progress. He saw me as a risk factor. I felt anger then, real anger, but not the kind that explodes, the kind that makes you sit very still and realize the ground beneath you has already shifted, the kind that whispers, this isn't about love anymore, this is about judgment, and once judgment replaces trust, the damage is already done. The call came on a Tuesday morning. Not dramatic, not sudden. Just a calendar invite labeled Quick Check-in from my director, sitting there like a quiet warning I pretended not to see. By then, the signs had been everywhere. Budget freezes, leadership reshuffles, projects paused mid-sentence. I knew what was coming before I logged into the video call, but knowing doesn't make the words land any softer. They were restructuring. My role was being eliminated. It wasn't performance-related. They appreciated my contributions. There was severance, resources, a practiced script delivered with professional sympathy. I nodded, thanked them, and closed my laptop. For a long moment, I just sat there in silence, staring at my reflection in the dark screen. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I felt hollow, like something had been scooped out of me and left behind a quiet echo. Daniel was working from home that day. I waited until his call ended before telling him. I stood in the doorway, hands clasped so tightly my fingers hurt. I got laid off, I said. His face changed, concern, surprise, and then something colder slipped in behind his eyes. What happened? He asked. Company-wide cuts. I saw it coming. He exhaled sharply. And now what? The question wasn't supportive, it was evaluative. I'm okay, I said carefully. I've been preparing for this. I've been interviewing. That was when everything collapsed. Interviewing, he repeated. Since when? For months, I said. I told you I was positioning myself. He shook his head, jaw tight. You should have been upfront about that. I stared at him. I was. No, he said. You were vague. There's a difference. The silence stretched between us, thick and heavy. Finally, he said, I can't do this. I can't build a future on uncertainty. There it was. Not concern, not fear, a verdict. That night, he slept in the spare room. The next morning, I woke to the sound of drawers opening and zippers closing. He was packing a bag. I'm going to stay with a friend for a while, he said, without meeting my eyes. How long? I asked. He paused. I don't know. I need space to think. Space to think about whether I was worth staying for. The door closed behind him with a quiet finality that echoed through the apartment. I stood there long after he left, staring at the empty space where his shoes used to be. That was the moment it all hit me at once. The job, the relationship, the future I thought I was building. Gone. I sat on the kitchen floor that night, back against the cabinet, eating cold leftovers because cooking for one felt unbearable. My phone stayed silent. No check-in, no reassurance, just absence. And that's when the despair really settled in. Not the dramatic kind, the suffocating kind. The kind that makes you question your judgment, your worth, your sense of reality. I replayed every conversation in my head, wondering when I had stopped being enough, wondering how loving someone could turn into being evaluated like a liability. For the first time, I let myself admit the truth I had been avoiding. When things got hard, he didn't stay. He didn't ask questions. He didn't trust me. He walked away while I was still standing in the wreckage, trying to explain myself. That night, lying alone in the dark, I whispered a question I was almost afraid to answer. If he couldn't believe in me now, had he ever really believed in me? At all?
The morning after Daniel left, the apartment felt unnaturally quiet. Not peaceful, just hollow. The kind of silence that makes you notice every small sound. The refrigerator humming, the distant traffic, the creak of the floor when you shift your weight. It felt like the walls were waiting for me to fall apart. But I didn't. I didn't have the luxury of collapsing into grief or self-pity. Not yet. I had 4 days before the most important interview of my career, an interview I had been quietly preparing for long before everything fell apart. So I did the only thing that made sense. I made a plan. Not the kind you post online, not the kind that comes with motivational quotes or dramatic declarations, just a practical, almost boring plan, the kind built for survival. I blocked out my days by the hour. Morning, technical review. Afternoon, mock interviews. Evening, system design and case walkthroughs. I rewrote architecture diagrams until my fingers cramped. I practiced explaining complex financial models out loud until my voice went hoarse. I recorded myself answering behavioral questions and replayed them while cooking, while folding laundry, while lying in bed staring at the ceiling. The apartment became a quiet war room. And slowly, something unexpected happened. The fear began to change shape. At first, every time my stomach tightened, Daniel's words echoed in my head. No ambition, too comfortable, afraid to risk failure. But repetition dulls even the sharpest edges. Eventually, those words stopped cutting and started fueling something else. Focus, resolute, clarity. I wasn't doing this to prove him wrong. I was doing this because I had already invested months of my life into becoming ready, and I refused to let his doubt erase that work. By the third day, the despair loosened its grip. I still felt sadness, still felt loss, but it no longer owned every thought. There was room now for something steadier. Confidence. Not loud, not flashy, just grounded. The night before the interview, I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, hair pulled back, face tired but clear. "You didn't come this far by accident," I whispered to my reflection. "You earned this." The next morning, I put on a navy blazer, simple and sharp, no power outfit theatrics, just clothes that felt like me. I logged into the interview portal 10 minutes early and sat still, breathing slowly. The building itself was impressive. Glass, steel, clean lines, the kind of place people associate with ambition. But when the interview began, something shifted. They weren't interrogating me. They were listening. We talked through real problems, real trade-offs, decisions that didn't have perfect answers. They asked how I handled uncertainty, how I made calls with incomplete information, how I led when outcomes weren't guaranteed. And for the first time in weeks, I felt seen, not evaluated, understood. 2 hours passed like 20 minutes. When the final interviewer leaned back and smiled thoughtfully, I knew, not with certainty, but with a quiet internal recognition, that I belonged in that room. When the call ended, I didn't celebrate. I didn't cry. I just sat there, hands resting on my desk, and let out a slow breath. Whatever happened next, I had done this on my own terms. Daniel hadn't believed in me, but I had. And for the first time since everything collapsed, that felt like enough. The offer arrived 3 days later. Not with fireworks, not with dramatic music, just an email sitting quietly in my inbox, subject line simple and almost understated. I read it once, then again. Director-level role, compensation far beyond what I'd ever earned before, equity, authority, trust. My hands trembled slightly as I scrolled, not from shock, but from the weight of realization settling in my chest. This wasn't luck. This wasn't timing. This was the result of months of preparation done in silence. I accepted the offer without hesitation. There was no one to celebrate with, no partner pulling me into a hug, no one telling me how proud they were, just me, alone in the apartment that still felt too big, whispering, "Okay, we did it." And that was enough. A week later, Daniel came back. Not with anger, not with accusation, with calm. He stood in the doorway like someone rehearsing a difficult conversation, posture straight, voice controlled. "We need to talk," he said. I closed my laptop and nodded. He sat across from me, hands clasped together like he was about to deliver feedback in a meeting. "I've been thinking a lot," he began, "about us, about what I want, about what kind of future I need." I listened quietly. He continued, "I don't think we're aligned. I need someone who's hungry, someone who's moving forward, not waiting for things to happen." The irony nearly made me laugh, but I didn't. Instead, I felt something else. Detachment. Not numbness. Clarity. "You're ending this," I said calmly. He hesitated. "I think it's for the best." I studied his face, realizing something that surprised me. He wasn't leaving because he knew the truth. He was leaving because he believed a version of me that no longer existed. "I see," I said softly. He frowned. "That's it? You're not going to fight for this?" "You just told me you don't believe in the future I'm building. What would I be fighting for?" The silence stretched. He looked unsettled, not by anger, but by my composure. 3 hours later, he packed his things. No shouting, no tears, just logistics. When the door closed behind him, he paused. "I hope you figure things out," he said. I nodded. "You too." When the door closed behind him, I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished. 2 weeks later, my new role was announced publicly. A professional post, a polished photo, my name attached to leadership, vision, responsibility. Congratulations poured in from colleagues, mentors, people who had seen my work long before Daniel ever questioned it. That was when his messages started. "Congrats on the new role. That company is impressive. I didn't realize you were interviewing at that level. Maybe we moved too fast apart. Would love to catch up." I stared at the screen for a long moment. This right here was the moment. Not the breakup, not the layoff. This, the return. When the outcome was shiny, when the uncertainty had passed, when my value was suddenly obvious. I typed slowly. "We didn't grow apart. You walked away because you decided I had no ambition, no future. I already had this opportunity when you left. I just didn't share it with someone who had already stopped believing in me. I wish you well." I reread it once. Then I sent it. And then I blocked him. Not out of spite, out of self-respect. Friends reached out next. Well-meaning ones, curious ones. "He regrets it. He didn't know. He feels terrible now." I replied with the same calm truth every time. He didn't need to know my title or salary to treat me with respect. Eventually, the messages stopped. And in that quiet space, something settled fully into place. This wasn't revenge. This was consequence. He didn't lose me because I failed. He lost me because he couldn't stand beside me while I was still becoming. And that realization, that boundary, was more satisfying than any argument could have been. By early summer, my life looked full in ways I hadn't expected. Work was intense, but in the best way, the kind of pressure that comes from being trusted, not tested. Meetings where my ideas mattered, decisions where uncertainty wasn't treated like weakness, but like a reality to navigate. I woke up tired and went to bed satisfied, the quiet kind of satisfied that doesn't need to be announced. I moved furniture around the apartment, bought new plants, threw away mugs Daniel had always complained about. Small changes, but symbolic ones. The space started to feel like mine again, not a shared stage, not a compromise, just mine. Friends stopped asking about him. His name faded naturally from conversations, and when I did hear updates through the occasional mutual connection, they landed without impact. He was dating someone new. It didn't last. Apparently, she thought he wasn't financially stable enough for long-term plans. The irony wasn't lost on me, but it didn't bring satisfaction, just clarity. People often meet the lessons they need, whether they're ready or not. A few months later, something quietly significant happened. I bought a house. Not a flashy one, a solid, sunlit place in a calm neighborhood with a home office that felt like a promise to myself. The kind of house Daniel used to talk about as proof of moving forward fast enough. I moved in without fanfare, no grand announcement, just a deep breath and the sound of keys turning in a lock that belonged to me. Around the same time, I started seeing someone new, slowly, intentionally, someone kind, steady, someone who didn't ask where I'd be in 5 years like it was an exam, someone who didn't measure my worth by momentum or optics. We weren't rushing, and that felt right. One evening, after unpacking the last box, I sat alone in my new office, window cracked open to let in the soft autumn air. Leaves rustled outside. The house was quiet, warm, settled. And that was when the thought came. Not bitter, not heavy, just honest. Daniel wasn't entirely wrong. We did grow apart, but he got the timeline wrong. He thought I had no ambition when I was at my most ambitious. He called me cautious when I was being strategic. He evaluated me by the storm I was walking through, not by the woman I was becoming on the other side of it. And that's the difference I understand now. I don't need someone who stays when the outcome is impressive. I need someone who stays when the outcome is uncertain. Because love, real love, isn't about betting on the sure thing. It's about standing next to someone before the results are in. I wasn't abandoned because I failed. I was abandoned because my becoming made someone uncomfortable. And once I understood that, the need to prove anything disappeared completely. So if you're listening to this and you're in that in-between space, the part where you're still building, still preparing, still figuring it out, I want you to hear this clearly. Being misunderstood during your hardest season does not define your worth. Being doubted does not mean you are wrong, and someone walking away from you at your most uncertain moment says more about them than it ever will about you. Sometimes the quietest endings carry the most powerful beginnings, and this one, finally, belonged to me.